Hi, everybody. Robert Ogilvy, executive EQ coach and executive strategist and EQ coach. Make rocket ship go now. Glad you guys are here. I know I did that whole thing out of sequence. Anyway, glad you're here. Today's topic: what are the three tensions that you need to balance out for you to be both driven and pragmatic in a professional sense? And so this is an interesting topic, and I'm not sure we're going to get through it all today. I'm pretty sure we won't. And the reason why is that I think people are thirsting for the driven part of it, the freedom part of it, good motivation more than ever. And also, I would say that there are professional roles which are supposed to be almost like so coldly pragmatic that it's very difficult for someone to be in a balanced way fully fulfilled in the long term. And so these are the two extremes. There's this unmet need, particularly I would say for the driven side of it, for the freedom side, and then there are these roles, these very demanding roles that not everyone wants to do. And how do we balance all of these out? Okay, so I'll try to bring this down to something more specific, and this is basically what we're talking about. There are three pairs of tensions we're dealing with. So these are basically the different facets that compose motivation and the different facets that compose execution, right? And we can talk about this individually or in a team or in an organization. So this is best described too in terms of what context, what the organizational context is focusing on. But the three tensions are autonomy and accountability, mastery and feedback. And the last one is meaning and focus. Okay, so we'll dive into more what these are and why these are often in tension. Okay, so autonomy and accountability, right? Autonomy is really very much about you making your own choices, your sense of empowerment that you can make choices or have influence over something, right? What's accountability? It's how responsible you feel for the results of some outcome, right? How much you are kind of duty bound, honor bound, commitment bound, interested in getting that outcome, right? So these are intention, right? This is not to say that if you're free and autonomous that you have no accountability, but you could see how if were accountable to too many things, or we would often use the term overcommitted, that actually really cuts down your sense of freedom. But it also becomes like a balance issue, right? If you're way overcommitted in too many things, it's like there's a lack of priority issue, right? So what are you really interested on, or why how is this situation creep into something so imbalanced, right? Um, Secondly, we talked about mastery a bit last time. There's a lot to say here, but in this context, I would just boil down mastery to say to what degree are you using your strengths and gifts and able to apply them in your work, right? And that's very motivating to do that. And then that is it is empowered by feedback loops, but it's also intention, particularly if, okay, so in an OODA loop sense, you need feedback to be able to learn and grow, right? You need feedback on your results. And also one of the criteria for a flow state is that you have a very tight, basically immediate feedback loop so that you can like immediately respond and stay in that action awareness flow state, right? But feedback in a normal work sense is normally not that tight and normally at best more customer focused, more outer pragmatic results focused, right? And so part of the ascensus to feedback is less about what do I care about and more about what do you care about, right? It's a very outer focus, or even if it's not customer focus, it's a data focus, right? And that requires a certain emotional mastery and coolness to be able to be really like objectively feedback oriented, right? That means that mastery and feedback in that sense, in a work sense, can be intention, or at least you want to think of it as a gateway. You really need to have your sense of mastery down, clear about the things you're great at before you really want to get into tight feedback loops with that, right? You, if you got into areas where you had to play a lot of feedback attention to what was going on, but it wasn't something you were like masterfully interested in, that would be super demoralizing, right? You would not want to do that. And that brings us naturally to the last point, which is meaning and focus our intention, right? So meaning is doing work that you not just that you like to do, but particularly that it's consequential and worth doing. There's a sense of of impact and worthwhileness to the kind of work you're doing, and that can be intention to how focused you are on particular aspects of your work, or how much um, it starts to feel like aspects of autonomy, but it's like how much do I have to hyper specialize in my work, right? I think I gave you that example from Elaine de Bottom before, where it's like, oh, what cool, heroic, creative, interesting thing do you do in your work? Oh, well, I'm a specialized supply chain analyst in Southeast Asia, right? You know, very specialized, but it's probably actually reducing your sense of meaning and how you're helping others, and the utility and the high scale impact of your work, right? Um, so I mean, straight up, this is not either or answers. These are yes and, right? We need both of these things. That's why these are needs that are in tension, right? So we need to put effort to bring all of these into our lives. I would actually say that one of the uh, professional delusions from a coaching standpoint is that, I mean, people are always coming to coaching because there's some more top of mind goal or professional thing they're trying to achieve or develop to get better at, right? And yes, they if you're doing your job well, they can get better at that. But that there's from the balance coaching standpoint, there's inherently a lot of other things they're not focused on, right? So a lot of you may have done that kind of wheel of life exercise, and yes, you're very proud of your eights, nines, and tens, but how do those twos, threes, and fours actually feel in your life? And you're trying to get someone to realize you need to be effective, but you also need good relationships, and you also need health and well-being, and you also need quality of life, right? And you need to balance all these together, and no amount of over focusing in one area, no amount of being imbalanced can somehow bring you into balance. That's a crazy way of thinking, right? So we're trying to manage all these needs. Now, one thing I will say is that if you're really strong in one area, it probably means that you're really good at getting your needs met in that area. And the question is kind of a trade-off question. How do I trim that down to really boost these other parts of my life, right? To make the UX of my life better, right? This is actually a much broader issue around balance coaching, but so let me try to again focus on this kind of motivation and execution end of things, right? What this feels like for a person is this tension between how driven and how practical I am, and that is something that we're always trying to find that balance point of. If we go too far to one side, we go off the deep end. And here's what that tends to feel like. So you probably heard me kind of rag on the over efficiency, the super practical end of specialization. The driven end can also become super aloof though, because if the counterpoint to working really hard at some specialized thing you don't like is to flake out and do nothing, do a bunch of kind of floofy art and play, which is kind of like low level and consequential, or something else that can have basically strong kind of escapist tones. Another one I hear more and more is that people want to live away from everyone by themselves, or some notions of some kind of retreat center, right? There's a place for all of these. There's a space in your life for how do you deal with downtime and vacation. There's a space in your life for if you want to go on mindfulness retreats or do kind of like personal or spiritual practices, right? But to think that the solution to your life is as opposed to kind of being focused and working hard at something, and adjusting what that thing might be and how that balances in. Just say I'll flake out and kind of live like a monk or like be on permanent vacation mode. That's also a big misunderstanding of all that you could do in the world, and it kind of shows a burnout attitude, right? It's like you have very little left to give. I know this is a bit of a different talk because there's not clear, easy answers to this, except for trying to balance out these tensions is super important for us. So let me try to bottom line this here. What we're actually trying to see is to spot when we're making imbalanced choices or like not long-term choices, which are serving a lot of our long-term needs at once, right? And particularly from a choice theory lens, that's all we're doing. We're getting more elaborate quality worldviews to more comprehensively understand our needs and the environment around us, so that we can find ever more kind of multi-need satisfying, long-term need satisfying choices and context in our lives, right? And that takes effort and engineering, right? It's and that way it is long-term and systematic. The other important thing I'm going to say about this is know your level of need. The right balance point is not 50-50 in both. The right balance point is some combination of the two, depending on your needs and situation. So you need to know that. Okay, so being both practical and motivated is super important. The motivation part is composed of autonomy, meaning, and mastery. The execution part is composed of accountability, feedback, and focus. But these are all in tension, and you guys need to learn. We all need to learn to balance these things. So good luck. I hope you guys can get better at that. I'm Robert Ogilvy, Executive Strategy and EQ Coach. I'll talk to you guys later.